Rob, you have got some topics. You're out there doing your homework for Ruminate, and I appreciate it. You've got two very good topics here in our Ruminate note. It is an extensive note full of at least, 12 words, maybe 13 words.
At least.
There's a link. There's some bullets. It's a highly organized list that clearly took you most of the afternoon and into the evening. Because we are.
It's even got an Oxford comma.
We do. Well, you know what, Rob, I knew I can count on you for the Oxford comma. I can't say that about everybody in my life. There are people who don't use the Oxford comma, and I think it's a crime against humanity, really. But you did it right. So
I did. I'll let you in on a little secret. I say secret. I have rejected pull requests at work because they haven't used an Oxford comma, and I've made them change it.
Oh boy, you're our kind of people at Mac Stories. The Oxford comma is very near and dear to the Mac Stories team's heart. It really is. Oh, that's good to know. That you can't pull this. You can't pull this code. You got to get your Oxford commas right.
Exactly.
Very good. All right, let's start with bullet point number 1, which is the Stream Deck Plus.
Yes.
Which I think that was announced either early this week or maybe at the end of last week. I forget.
Yeah, I think it was the end of last week, maybe.
Yeah, I saw this. It crossed my radar at some point. And what piqued my curiosity about it is that it's basically the Loupe deck, which is something that I had reviewed probably a year and a half ago now, which is a more expensive, fancy version of the Stream Deck, but that had dials along the side. And this is a Stream Deck, which I think, if memory serves me, with like 15 buttons up top, a strip LCD screen, and then a couple of knobs and some buttons.
So I'm looking at a picture of it now. So it has eight squares. Okay. Little buttons. It then has eight. It's 8 on the top, and then it's what is functionally a touch bar of some description, and then it has 4 knobs at the bottom.
Yeah. All right. Yep. You know what I was describing to you was I was describing something to you, which is kind of Loupe Deck's response to the lower cost Stream Deck. It's like these two companies are coming at it from opposite ends of the spectrum and are kind of meeting in the middle, because Loupe Deck has something coming out called the Loupe Deck Live S, which is very much like the Stream Deck Plus, but it doesn't have, first of all, I guess the Loupe Deck, all of its buttons are screens, basically, touch screens, but they've got their Loupe Deck Live S is, I think, 15 buttons, which is similar to one of the other models of Stream Deck. Doesn't have a screen like this, has 2 knobs, and then I think a series of 4 buttons, but the knobs and buttons are arrayed on the sides of the device. So very similar. It costs $20 more, I think, and is about to come out very soon. I don't know if you order one of these Stream Decks, if they're available now, but this is $200. I think actually the Loupe Deck Live S is less than that. I think it's $179, which puts it kind of right in between this device and one of the Stream Decks that has something like 15 or 16 buttons, whatever the kind of, standard size is between the Mini and the XL.
Yeah, it is interesting to see them both sort of just releasing all these different products. I hadn't actually heard about the Loupe Deck Live S, because I feel like even in the last 2 years, you are still the only person that's mentioned a Loupe Deck to me. Like I haven't seen anybody using one on a stream on Twitch or YouTube. Like nobody seems to mention this at all.
Yeah, they're pretty small and in comparison, and I think the reason is partly because they came out of kind of marketing to people using things like Photoshop and apps like that, and some audio editing gear. They weren't geared towards streaming at all, and they've been gravitating towards the streaming profile more with their recent stuff. And the Loupe Deck Live S actually was just a recent successful Indiegogo campaign, and I think the device is now being shipped to the backers and is going to be available publicly very soon, within the next month or so, because they actually are going to send me one. I'm going to check it out. I mean, I think for most people, the Stream Deck, one of the Stream Decks is a better choice, just because I think for most tasks, buttons are better than dials. Dials are really good if you're doing photo editing or audio or video editing. They are good for those kind of things. Or if you want to have volume controls or those kind of things. But I think a lot of people who are wanting these for automation, whether it's like shortcuts or Keyboard Maestro or just firing off keyboard shortcuts, it's the buttons are a lot better choice in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I mean, I haven't actually bought my Steam Deck yet. Stream Deck, not Steam Deck, Stream Deck. I think just for various reasons, house things, baby on the way. I can't really afford to buy a Stream Deck right now.
Yeah.
I'm kind of glad I didn't now, because now I feel like maybe I would go for this Plus one, because I kind of like the idea of the knobs for different volumes and lights and stuff like that. So
Yep.
I feel like this is probably the one that's going to go on my list.
Probably the coolest thing I did with one of the knobs on the Loupe Deck back in the day was I tied it to the back and forward buttons in Obsidian, so I could kind of navigate through my document history.
That's amazing.
Yeah, just by turning the knob, which is really neat. And you could do the same thing with Safari's back and forth. Anything that has, because essentially the way they work is that there's one trigger for turning it left and another trigger for turning it right, and it just increments whatever the action is. So you can have it, if it's anything that can be incremented like that, it tends to work. I don't know if the Stream Deck has pushable knobs. I know that the Loupe Deck had ones where you could actually press the knobs then to like get yet another action tied to them. But yeah, it's kind of, these things are kind of neat. I blow hot and cold on these kind of devices. I do have a Stream Deck under my studio display right now, and I got to say, I haven't used it a lot in the last several months. I'm probably going to dive back in and set it up to do some more things than I had set up before. I think part of it is because I change my setup so often with testing different apps that I don't know. The buttons become obsolete fairly quickly, but I have at times found the one app I would say on the Mac that I found it really useful for is Obsidian, only because basically every function in Obsidian can be tied to a keyboard shortcut, and one of the easiest and most reliable things you can have a Stream Deck do is simply to run a keyboard shortcut. And because you can tie profiles to particular apps, when I switch to that app, it automatically changes all my Stream Deck buttons, and I can see the ones that are just for Obsidian. But I also have done things like had a quick button for sending an article on the web to a read later app, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like I say, it's still kind of thing I want, but it's just at the moment I can't justify the 100, 150 or 200 pounds at this point.
Yeah.
For this one, so it's fine, but it's nice to have options.
Yeah, and I'm glad that they're continuing to try different things. It's not, none of these devices are one size fit all, and given that I think knobs really do come in handy for certain types of activities, and so it kind of really depends on what kind of work you do. They even have the foot pedal one where you can stomp on a button basically.
Oh well, yeah.
and I think David Sparks actually bought that, which it's a little bit. It serves a purpose. If you are streaming and you want your hands to do something else, having a pedal on the floor, whether it's for that or if you're playing an instrument or something like that, it makes a lot of sense. I think for somebody who's like into things like shortcuts, it probably doesn't really make any sense other than you can say, look, I stepped on the floor and my shortcut ran, and
yeah, exactly. You turn the lights on when you stamp on the floor.
Cool tricks with shortcuts. I think, well, that's a whole nother story about it. I think people sometimes get a little carried away with.
Yeah, definitely.
With I would call them stunt shortcuts. Shortcuts that are make for good demos, but aren't really solving a practical computing problem, which that's
definitely.
not to say that shortcuts is not a useful tool. I use it a lot myself, but I do think that those kind of like good demo, not really practical shortcuts do automation a disservice at the end of the day, because I think that's where you get a lot of people like, oh, this is just like this nerd thing of people doing this thing that's not really, it's more work than it is useful. And I understand why people come away with that impression sometimes, because if you watch YouTube or, see some of the stuff that people are sharing videos on Twitter or whatever, sometimes you're like, well, why did someone spend their afternoon doing this thing that you could just, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, while we're on the topic of shortcuts, because I have made a couple in the last sort of month or two, as somebody who writes code for a living, I cannot stand using shortcuts, because all I want to do is just like write an if statement or check this, and I'm like,
I know,
and I got to learn all these functions. Like, don't get me wrong, it works and I can get there eventually, but it feels like learning a completely separate programming language, or not even a language, like a complete entire framework.
Yeah, it's a different perspective. And I think actually when I first started using shortcuts, one of the things that I found most difficult was that I did have just enough programming knowledge to find it frustrating. Like the way it handles variables, I was like, well, this is not the way programming languages handle variables. This is not right at all. And it's actually a lot simpler and a lot more user friendly. On the other hand, if you've kind of been trained in a certain way of thinking about things like variables, it's kind of foreign to you, and it can actually, the programming knowledge I think can get in the way of being good at shortcuts.
Oh yeah, definitely. And one of the things I found, like I have a couple that are only for the Mac. I don't really need them on iOS. All I end up doing is throwing out to like Automator or AppleScript or JavaScript for automation, because I'm like, I can just write that and I know exactly what I'm doing.
Well, and this is one of my big complaints that was in my Ventura review this year, which is I really appreciate that when shortcuts came to the Mac, that Apple went the extra mile and incorporated things like all the popular existing Automator actions and added things like shell scripting and terminal commands and AppleScript and all that stuff. But I do feel like maybe they've leaned too hard on that, because one of the problems that Automator always had, I think, is that I would get 2 or 3 steps into an Automator automation and I would be like, oh, now I got to use AppleScript, and it's like not well documented and kind of hard. And I find myself doing that too often on the Mac with shortcuts, where it's like, well, there's just certain things that can be done by AppleScript that can't be done by shortcuts. And, if shortcuts really is the future of automation on the Mac, that shouldn't be the case. And I feel like, and I was talking to Federico about this recently, it's like, well, the one thing that's nice is that my AppleScripts with shortcuts tend to be shorter than they ever were with Automator. But by the same token, if it's a short AppleScript, shouldn't that just be an action then? That's it's a lack of growing the library of system actions for shortcuts. And we saw that was one of the things about Ventura. There were no new system level actions added to the library. There were some things added for system apps, but actual system properties and systems, like for instance, did you just connect an external drive or disconnect, mount or unmount a drive? Things like that would be super handy. It's like, oh, I just plugged in this external drive. How about do a time machine backup now? You can't do that with shortcuts, right?
Yeah,
and you should be able
to.
Yeah, you should be. That seems like that's like one of those that's like, to me, that's like super obvious. Having an awareness of what peripherals, what accessories are connected to your Mac and what's going on with them is pretty fundamental, and none of that stuff is in there. And some people tell me I'm too impatient, but and I will admit that I've been on Ventura longer than most people. I've already been on Ventura for 6 months almost, right? So for me, it feels like it's been a year and a half since I got the original shortcuts actions, not just a year. but I do feel like they really need to get out of this mode of fixing shortcuts. So hopefully it's still buggy, but it's getting better. They need to get out of that mode, and they need to get in the mode of expanding it, because it really didn't. There's very little news this year with Ventura.
Yeah. Wow, that was a bit more of a shortcuts rant than I thought we were
going
to get on.
It was. It happens every now and then. I got things on my mind and I don't even know it, Rob. I mean, we're heading into the holidays. And heading into the holidays is when I actually take a deep breath and start thinking about things. So that's where a lot of the new story ideas and plans and projects all come from. And I guess I've had shortcuts on my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know what I've had on my mind, because I'm watching a flood of people create accounts, or at least attempt to create accounts, is Mastodon and microblog and Tumblr. I don't know if you saw this.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, Tumblr have said they're going to implement ActivityPub, which means that you can follow Tumblr blogs through your Mastodon account or on micro.blog, which apparently is already a feature that Matt and Reese had implemented for Tumblr, but this will be like, the standard way of doing things. And
you should be able to do it the other way around too. You should be able to follow micro.blog on your Tumblr too if you want, right? I mean,
exactly, yeah, and it would work the same way for Mastodon accounts. And since this week, I have found a couple of other implementations of ActivityPub for blogs and stuff like that. So there are a few more around. Obviously, Mastodon is the largest one, and I think that's the one that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
And obviously, we spoke about me using micro.blog probably 3 months ago, something like that, a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. And the last couple of weeks, I've sort of been thinking about it more, because I'm like, do I want to use Mastodon for anything? And I feel like if you want something that's exactly like Twitter, where you're posting things and people are replying and you're having conversations and stuff, then I feel like Mastodon is maybe the way to go. For me, micro.blog feels a lot better because I control all the content. Like it's my website. I could move it off micro.blog tomorrow and it would still be exactly as it is now. But I've never seen, because there's been a few instances over the last few years of Twitter, sort of, Twitter's dead, or it's blowing up, or whatever. I've never seen this many people move into Mastodon as I have the last couple of weeks.
It's been a seismic shift. I have a perspective on this of having managed a bunch of different accounts, because I manage the Mac Stories and Club Mac Stories and App Stories accounts as well as my own, so I can see this across the board, and I watch the statistics. I use Typefully, which gives me some analytics about follower counts and stuff. And I mean, I'm not a person obsessing about these things. However, they're there, and I do look at them. And I can see the day that Elon Musk bought Twitter, there was a significant and noticeable drop in follower counts across every single account.
Yes.
And the curve was identical on all of them. None of it was like, one particular thing that was driving it. And it's not been like, huge. I don't even know what the percentages are. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a ton, but it's definitely noticeable. I mean, I can look at a year's worth of like follower counts for all those accounts and see them gradually, going up, sometimes dipping here and there. But on the whole, kind of gradually climbing over time until October, whatever it was, 27th or whatever the day was, when there was a significant dip. And with each news cycle where there was something big that happened with Twitter, another dip. And right now it seems to have stabilized a little bit, because Twitter's mainly out of the news for the most part, at least for the last 48 hours or so. And it's kind of stabilized, but you're right. I think it has been a pretty big impact. Here's an idea for you, Rob. You mentioned controlling the site and liking that aspect of micro.blog. What about having your own Mastodon instance that was just you?
Do you know, I actually did this previously. So this was the 2017 Exodus, I believe. So I did run my own Mastodon instance at that point. And I think if I was going to go on Mastodon again, which I'm still thinking about as I sort of, because more people are moving over now, I'm thinking, oh, maybe there is a place for both of those things. I feel like I would go with my own instance rather than joining one of the bigger ones. There are a few around that I've sort of got my eye on that are a bit more, they're smaller, they're a bit more focused on sort of web type stuff.
Sure.
Development, that kind of thing. But I think my own instance is not a bad solution. And previously I'd paid for it through, I think it's Mastodon host. I think they're closed for registrations at the moment, but I think it's like $5 or $6 a month for something that is big enough for just somebody like me, like one person.
Yeah, because then it really is just like your own website. It's kind of interesting that whole concept of doing it that way is interesting to me, because you can do it. I mean, I'm seeing, like, for instance, one of the things that made me think about it was that I saw that the Tweetbot folks are working on, they're experimenting with a Mastodon client. And one of the things that made me think about it is noticing in those videos that it's pretty apparent that Tapbots has their own Mastodon internal server that they're using that presumably is just for people who work at Tapbots, and that's kind of an interesting concept.
Yeah, that had, I haven't really seen a lot of this, although I do vaguely remember a news organization. So this was in the 2017 Exodus. I remember a news organization having their own Mastodon instance at that point. I for the life of me, I can't remember what it is.
Yeah.
But I could imagine I suppose it would work for massive organizations as well, but I could see a scenario where, for example, Mac Stories or, Relay or something like that had their own server that was just, say, for the hosts or the writers in Mac Stories instances. Like, I could see how that would sort of give the control that, I guess, kind of what I'm talking about. And, I know you sort of care about this, and I know Federico does as well. Like,
right.
We don't want to just be, I don't want to be contributing my stuff to somebody else's profit. And don't get me wrong, I don't feel like Mastodon doesn't feel like that, because it's this sort of big open source project, but I still have that same feeling where, like, I'm almost annoyed that there's so much stuff on Twitter, that I've posted, although at this point I've made it private, so only my followers can see it anyway. But
yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that if you join one of these big Mastodon servers like Mastodon.social, for instance, it's, in that sense, it's very much like Twitter, where whatever you're publishing on their server. I mean, it is, it's still freely open and accessible by everybody on any Mastodon server, and that's all great. But having your own instance gives you control of the content as well.
Yeah, definitely. And there's some nice things you can do, because, for example, like, some Mastodon instances don't allow bots.
Right.
Which is a lot of the big ones don't allow bots. Like, there are very specific, like, instances designed for bots, and, like, image generators, and the ones that, tweet the emoji cowboy. Do you know what I mean? Like, all of those weird of bots. So there are bot instances and stuff like that. But if you wanted, again, in the example of Mac Stories, you have all your writers, and then you could have bots that tweet out the links. You could have, you can have anything you want, really. Like, you can set up all these different accounts to do different things. You can set your own rules, and
right, your server, your rules, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, exactly. I've stopped myself from setting up my own instance yet, because I want to. I just want to make sure that's what I want to do before I do it again. Because I feel like I did one. It must have been about a year I used it for. And then I let the domain expire, and I kind of just deleted it all because I didn't really care. So I don't want to jump into anything and, like, commit myself to using it if I'm not going to.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I'm kind of torn about Mastodon. I kind of reactivated on there. It's funny, I think probably from the same era of 2017, I had a Mastodon account, and I actually had the same handle that I have everywhere, which is John Voorhees. And I can't get back into it. I think I must have deleted the account, but it still tells me that there is an account associated with that handle, so I can't get it back for some reason. I've had trouble figuring it out. So I had to switch to J Voorhees, which is fine. It's not a big deal. I re-signed up. I actually had a terrible time getting it set up. And that's because I was doing it with the probably the biggest rush about a week and a half ago with everybody. And the server was kind of unresponsive, and it wasn't letting new people in. I had to get in through an invitation from Federico, and so then I went through and I kind of went adding people. I looked around and I started adding folks who I follow on Twitter, and people started discovering me. And yeah, it's definitely way more activity than I ever saw when I was there in 2017, and I could see using it. I think it's hard to set up. I mean, I think there's a lot of friction getting started. Like I felt it. I mean, I kind of know what it's all about, and I joined before, and I went to kind of reactivate the whole thing. And I was like, there's this list of servers that are very, very focused and niche, and none of the ones on at least the Mastodon page seemed to really fit particularly well with my interests. I wanted something a little more general. And social was on there, but I mean, kind of the rest of them were a lot of them were very specific, and I didn't want anything super specific, and I didn't really know what to do. And I think conceptually how it works is a little bit hard for most people. I mean, it's totally fine for tech nerds, but I think it's still a little hard. And it is, I do think that even though it is federated, things like Mastodon.social is getting gigantic. And I think it's only natural, right, that people are going to kind of aggregate around whatever seems popular, even if people don't know exactly why they're picking the popular one, because there's also a little friction. Like if you want to follow someone who's on a different server, it's a little like finding someone. You have to make sure you get their exact address and then put it in the search box. And it's a little hard to find people on other servers as a result. And so all those things to me make it a little bit difficult to use. But I do think the idea, especially with this activity pub, having some of these things, having a way for people who are comfortable with Mastodon use it, but also ways for people to use things that are maybe a little more user-friendly, like micro.blog or Tumblr, right? And being able to aggregate all that stuff in one place, and presumably some of these Mastodon clients would be able to, maybe we get more generalized social media apps that can handle anything that works with ActivityPub, and then it kind of creates an abstracted layer where a lot of the difficulty of setting these things up is taken away, and it works a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like one of the biggest, I wouldn't say a problem, but one of the issues that does come up is, for example, I'm using micro.blog and I follow people on Mastodon. But Mastodon has the concept of content warnings for content warnings, for spoilers. People use them for they use them for comedic effect. Make you click on a thing and you go, oh, you've looked at this stupid picture, whatever. And those aren't necessarily supported in, say, microblog, or I don't know what Tumblr's implementation is going to look like.
Sure.
So you can sometimes end up in this situation where I'm seeing a post from somebody where it just had some words. And because there's no standard way to deal with the content warnings, like you just need to support it. At the moment, that isn't supported. So it's like, oh, okay, you can kind of see where the seams are, but it's still really nice that I can just follow you there. I haven't had to rush and sign up a Mastodon account somewhere, or set up my own instance. I can just follow you there. I feel like that its biggest strength is also its biggest problem. Is it feels like it's like RSS but on steroids, and I'm not really sure. RSS has never really taken off outside of people who could explain to you what RSS is in the first place.
It's harder than RSS too, which is a problem, I think, because at least with like RSS app, you have apps that have come up to track RSS feeds, and a lot of them come with some sort of search functionality or directory or way to find content. And I feel like that's a little bit lacking with Mastodon right now. But I am kind of experimenting with it. So if anybody is interested in following me, I am Jay Voorhees on Mastodon.social. So I'm not doing a lot over there right now yet. That's mainly because it's the holiday season and I'm coming off being really busy at work. So it's not so much that I set it up as a plan B and I'm going to abandon it. It's more that I just haven't had time to really get my feet wet and get acclimated in Mastodon. I'm not walking away from Twitter, if anybody's wondering. At least not yet. But that's driven more by the work that I do than it is personal stuff.
Well, I mean, I can put it on record now that I am. I mean, my account's private. I've downloaded my archive. I have an online backup of it if I ever hit a link and I need to see that tweet. Which, if anyone's interested, is hellsite.rnight.me, because that's the subdomain I went with.
That's good.
Yeah, it was funny actually. I'd started a new project on my computer. I'd created this folder. I'd called it Hellsite, and I'd downloaded my archive, and I'd started sort of working through dealing with the JSON that comes from the export. And then a developer called Zach Leatherman, who builds Eleventy, which is a static site generator.
Oh yeah, I've heard of it.
He then released Tweetback, which is this archiving thing. It literally takes your archive, generates the website, and all of that. And I was like, oh, that's so good, because otherwise I was about to spend hours messing around with this JSON.
Oh, that's really nice. That's good to know. I got my archive too. I think when was it? Let's see. As we're talking, it was probably about 12 days ago now. It was on a Monday, right? It was a Monday that I requested it. Probably the Monday after everything seemed like it could shut at any moment. And it took 6 days for me to get it. It took until the following Sunday. I thought maybe they had shut it down, the service down, because it takes a while usually, but it doesn't usually take 6 days.
No, mine took 9 days.
Oh, wow.
And what was interesting was it had tweets that I had tweeted within that 9 days. So I had tweeted something new. So
interesting.
So I don't think it, as best I can tell, it doesn't start the archive and then it finishes and gets sent to you. Right. I think you just get put in a queue.
And there's like one guy hitting a button, getting Command S for all these different people, creating zip files.
Right, exactly. So my last tweet was "I'm done," which was quite nice. Like that was that was my last tweet before I made it private. So I also said some other choice words that I won't say on the podcast. But
wow, it took a while to get it. Mine was like 1.1 gigabytes or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I think mine was just under a gigabyte, but I think you maybe post more photos and previews from articles and stuff.
Yeah, because people like the pretty pictures. That makes them click on your links.
Yeah, I've
got a little.
Pictures.
I'll admit to having a little SEO in my blood. You're a web developer. You know how these things work. Give the people the pictures. Course. So I do
use this one weird trick with Obsidian.
Yeah, exactly. Every now and then I do a tweet like that, and I always feel dirty. But I do it ironically when I do it, and I think most people kind of get it, at least who know me. But
yeah.
But every now and then I'll do one of those kind of ironic, very SEO tweets, and I'll look at those numbers I was talking about and Typefully. I'm like, oh. Yeah, that does actually work.
Yeah, when we see a listicle on Mac Stories, we know it's all gone downhill.
Oh yeah, all hell is broken loose, and Federico and I are being held hostage in some undisclosed location. Yeah,
that'll be it. That'll be the canary in the coal mine. As soon as there's a listicle, I'll be like, right, John's in trouble.
John's in big trouble.
Oh, well, anyway, I think we should probably wrap it up, or we're going to end up going for quite a while.
I think so. Let's do it. All right,
okay.
Rob. Well, I will talk to you after Thanksgiving sometime.
Yeah, enjoy your Thanksgiving.
Thanks.